this on? Can you hear me? Oh, you can. Okay. Hadala isis et is ontigudele di hadas hatagen, akas kustri alagen. Sanatla stastis olnai hatau de ejung, de klingwai klakia la awiagen. Donna Douglas di au ejung. Alec and Ruth di chin dinanu ejung. James, Annie di chin dinanu ejung. Sanohat, Kate di chin dinanu ejung. Hikta handalai stut ejung. Good people, I'm happy to be here with you today. I said my mind is warm to be here with you. I forgot part of my introduction. Skatlawa hinu de keong, klagatoa hinu de keong, Windy Todd yatsakit hinu de keong. I'm of the Haida Nation. I am Eagle. I'm Sanatlas Fish Egg Clan of the Sculpin House. Deklingwai klakia la awayagen. That is how I say I'm a Haida scientist. I'm an observer of the world. And that's really important for me to put into my introduction to show our younger generations that as we go through academia and we go through these professional spaces, we can maintain that identity of who we are. We don't have to put it over here. We can't be two people. I told you who my family was. My mother's Donna Douglas. My grandparents are Alec and Ruth. My great-great-grandparents are James and Annie. And my great-great-great-grandparents are Sanohat and Kate. And my family comes from Heidelberg, Alaska. My Haida name is Skatlua, meaning to laugh while peeling bark precisely. So basically laughing while being OCD. I'm a scientist. There it is. This summer I had the honor of being gifted and bringing alive my great-great-grandmother's name, Klagatawa, copper shield of this place. And it was a big honor to get that. I never got to know her. She died when my Jana was a baby in a house fire. So to bring that back and honor her was profound for me. And my English name is Windy Todd. If you have questions, you have to say Skatlawa. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I'm just joking. Anyway, how for having us here today. I look forward to having good conversation with you.
Does that work? There we go. Okay. And you all heard from me, so I'm not going to introduce myself this afternoon, but I am going to let you know that this is going to be a little bit more of an interactive session. All those things that you see on your table, we're going to need you to work with. So be prepared for that. And if you're not at a table, I think we have a few, you'll need to be at one that has paper and pencils for the first activity that we're going to do. But to begin with, we are going to start with making sure that we are centered and coming at this session in a right way. I'm going to go over the objectives, and then we're going to spend some time centering. So our objectives for this session are to discuss the relationships between social drivers of health and Indigenous knowledge and perspectives of health. And then to recognize and respect the importance and uniqueness of both of those knowledge systems, of both Western knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, and how that influences our definitions of health. And then lastly, to identify and implement strategies in order to ethically bridge those two knowledge systems in healthcare settings. So with that, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually wanted to start with that one page that's underneath there. My page that's underneath there. Thank you. I wanted to do a couple of things I didn't tell you about. First of all, this has been my best friend for 40 years. I met her when we were 5. She chased me down the beach with a little crab. Her hair was cut off and she had no front teeth. And I've been torturing her the rest of her life. We always try to work together, but we're in such different fields. I'm an oceanographer, geochemist, microbiologist, educator, and being able to speak with Jana it makes me want to cry, because we've been trying to work together for so long, and so being able to bring some of the work that I do in Indigenous science into healthcare was how we kind of just it's been going for a couple years, and I was like, I do that, you do that, let's start working together. So it's an honor to speak with you today. and share stage space with you. I wanted to, as a Haida woman, I take my cultural responsibility very seriously, and I want to recalibrate a conversation that I've heard conversations today, and I just want to recalibrate a few things. Suffering from obesity. I'm overweight. I have a high BMI. I don't suffer from obesity. I suffer from the judgment of being an overweight woman. I suffer from the colonized constructs of what bodies should look like. Okay? So I wanted to realign that because I've had so many instances. I have had chronic pancreatitis for 2 decades, and every time I went into that doctor's office, well, you don't have this, you're just overweight. Not true. Luckily, I'm an iron geochemist, and when they would start talking to me about iron in my blood, I understood what they were talking about. And then when you start having those conversations with doctors, when they realize, then there's a different conversation, but it's always starting with disrespect. So I want to recalibrate how you see your patients coming in, okay? Don't judge. Take a step back. When we come into your offices and reach out to you, we're in a space of vulnerability, okay? In our culture, everybody's beautiful. We have a variety of shapes and sizes for a reason, okay? Fat's not always bad. There's a purpose to it too. So I just wanted to recalibrate how we see people and how we describe them and talk about them and how we interact with them when they walk into your office, okay? And then the other thing, I wanted to recalibrate our idea of wealth, okay? In the western part of my life, money is economic drivers rule, right? We have companies here, those are economic drivers. But in our communities, while we're considered poverty, we have millions of dollars of food resources, cultural and traditional use products. Our wealth is in our environment and our ecosystems and our relationships with one another. So when we talk about poverty, what are we talking about? Okay, we have a ecological currency that we use, and in that currency is our food, which drives our health, and that environmental health again drives our community. So that determines our relationship with the environment that we're in. So I've heard a couple times the comments about wealth, and we view it very differently. Our community, if you did an economic study, we're both from Heidelberg, poverty. But if you went through people's freezers and looked at what they had, each house has about 3 chest freezers. Each person, we have about $6 to $10 million in food resources in people's homes now. And so that's a different form of wealth, okay? So I just wanted to address those and shift the narrative to something positive, away from deficit language. We're not just unhealthy, poor people, okay? We have another narrative. And so I wanted just to address that as part of what I feel is my responsibility, and has nothing to do with Dr. Towne. Captain Towne, this is just my own, what I was listening to, and you have 2 more days here. I have to leave tomorrow, but I hope that you think about those things as you hear them and recognize them, because our people hear them when they're said. And it impacts the trust or distrust in interacting with medical professionals. If we're going to walk in and be judged or considered poor and whatever, they're not going to reach out to you for help, okay? So sorry, go ahead. Oh, yeah. Thanks. If you're interested, there's a bunch of resources. A lot of these slides I'm going to talk through today. Here's some of the books that I've read. There's many more, but these are really good ones. They go through decolonial methodologies for research, the doctrine of discovery and just war theory, which defines how health is defined in non-Indigenous communities, bridging cultures. There's one on education. These are really fantastic books. If you're looking for a resource, I would suggest you just look into some of these. They're really great for guiding how we interact with other cultures and with one another. Okay. So this is, we're both part of Tlingit Haida Central Council members, and so this is the cultural values that they post as our way of life. And each community has their own protocols, practices, and cultural values. And so I wanted to put those there for you to see. I will move through this working to recognize those values and to talk to you in a way that's respectful. And what we share, the way I think of this is when I share with you, because I share personal stuff, I'm in ceremony with you. And I will always engage with you respectfully. And I ask that you engage with me the same way. We're in a free intellectual space to talk about how we ask whatever you need to ask. There's no hurt feelings here, okay? But for a minute, to think about how we act and not react. We react a lot, but let's think about getting centered. And so I do this a lot in every talk and class that I teach. How are you feeling right now, physically, mentally, and spiritually? Think of one word, and I'll give you a minute to think about that. How are you coming into this space? And I do this because, again, we react a lot. And so how do we act? When we react, people see that reaction and not the message. And so I try to work with students to be able to, when you come into a space, are you ready to learn? Or are you off kilter? And how do we recenter looking at our cultural values?
And then as we come together today, we want you also to pause and think about what are your intentions for today. So what made you come to this session and be in this room with us to learn, hopefully, about bridging Western Indigenous knowledge systems? What do you hope to get out of the session? And what happens if you don't get that out of the session at the end of this? So I'm going to also ask you to take a moment to do the same and think about what it is that you hope and intend to receive today.
That's all you know, right? You got the next few slides?
Do you want medicines?
I'm gonna sit down.
Do you want to talk about medicines?
Oh, the food? Okay. All right, so I brought some, we're going to talk about health and wellness. And up front here, and you're invited whenever we start doing some of the activities to come up here and look. There are some of our own health and medicine practices up here. I actually just got back from a 3-day Haida ceremony to reclaim health through ceremony and learning some of these practices. We have sage, seaweed, devil's club, that's what you can smell burning in here, tea, rose tea, iron, and I was putting that on me earlier today. We use hematite mixed with Vaseline, and it's for protection. And then spearmint, peppermint, to use for teas. And so these are just a few of our healing medicines that we use. Do you want to talk about any of these?
And some of the medicines, things that you may be familiar with, being from Alaska, and some of you from the tribes in Alaska, the seaweed is how our tribes received iodine before iodized salt. So it's helpful for goiter. My parents years ago worked with a university. I don't know if I ever quite got the story correctly out of them, which university, but I have a paper somewhere in a hope chest. And they actually analyzed the nutritional content of seaweed, and it contains all the minerals. It contains vitamin K, it contains vitamin C, it even has some protein in it, so nutritionally dense food, but also very good for GI cleansing. Don't ever eat a lot of it if you're not accustomed to it, because you will understand that firsthand. Things like the rose teas, also high in vitamin C. Devil's Club is a medicinal plant that is part of our Tlingit and Haida culture. There have been studies that have looked at its use actually with diabetes, but it's created into teas and salves and many different medicinal uses for that. What else do you have there?
Peppermint.
And peppermint, that one I think probably most people are familiar with. That's a little bit more mainstream. There are menthols in that help with digestive issues, and some think maybe some help with inflammation in the digestive tract because of the menthols. So, okay. Alrighty, so with that start, and I'm going to remove my blanket, but so when I told you earlier who I am, this is my family.
Dance, let's go. I torture her. It's my job in life.
We're a double-headed eagle. And as we started with this cultural centering, I wanted to make sure that I was also in the right space. Okay, so everybody here, it looks like faces that I saw in the room this morning. Is there anybody here that wasn't in the room when I spoke this morning? One hand. Okay. Come see me afterwards. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go through these slides again, but I wanted to make sure that they were in here. I wasn't sure if the breakouts would bring us people who didn't get the foundation that we had earlier today. So you heard a lot of discussion about social determinants and drivers of health and how they manifest in our communities and how they lead to social risk and health-related social needs and how we experience those. But I wanted to pause at this slide again. As we talk about this today, understanding that getting to health, so getting to those upstream drivers that we want to change in our communities, is going to take a little bit of a different shift. If we think about healthcare up to this point, I think we've all been working really hard for many, many years to shift the trajectory of health in our country and in our people and in our tribes. And I'd ask you, how are we doing with that? We're having some successes, and some areas that we're not making a lot of inroads. And when I shared the slide with the differences in health disparities in American Indians and Alaska Natives, unfortunately, we've led in most of those areas for a very long time. So as we talk about this today and come back to the model, I'm really going to encourage you to think about what needs to be different. And if we are able to shift how we think about working with Indigenous peoples in a way that they understand health, they understand how to be in the world, how I was raised to exist on a day-to-day basis, and we can begin to align healthcare with that definition of health, I believe that we can make more significant progress. So as you look at the little guy on the left, and remember that our 20% of healthcare at the bottom has been working for a long time to change things, but that we learned earlier today that about 50% of the conditions in the community are what are driving health, and maybe even up to 80%. That really should start to get us to shift a little bit up in our mindset about what it's going to take to drive health. This slide, again, I'm not going to go into detail here, but suffice it to say that when I created this slide, I looked at the social drivers of health for the Healthy People 2030. There's not one of them that wasn't impacted by things that have happened in the past for American Indians, Alaska Natives. Not one, and at a broad level. So we're going to start with a little bit of shifting to, okay, if we know about disparity, what's the opposite of health disparity? It's health equity, and I believe firmly that's why you're all here working, is we're trying to change the state of health so that we all have this definition. It's a state in which everyone has a fair and just opportunity to attain the highest level of health. That's what I want for my community. It's what I want for my kids. It's what I want for the places that we live, is that we all get to achieve the highest levels of health that we can. So I'm going to ask you, and my scribe over here, She did
I'm
say
not a
she
good
was
scribe
in,
either.
she was in education, right? So they
Yeah.
write on boards.
I'm in the digital age. I don't write. And so just so you know, this
So-
morning when I came in, I knocked down the cup tower. I dropped the grapes all over the floor, and I spilt my water all over my table. So this is going to be good. It was just like,
I'm keeping my distance. And we want you to be comfortable here. This is hopefully going to be a little bit more interactive. We want to hear from you. We want to have some dialogue with you.
she's got
I'm
one.
feeling a little trapped by this
If
microphone.
anyone wants to
So-
speak, what does health equity mean to you?
Yeah, so we're going to ask you this. When you think about health equity, what does that mean to you? And give us some words, and we're going to write them up here.
Access.
Access.
Thank you. The people online appreciate you speaking into the microphone.
Thank you for being the brave first voice.
Best practice.
Best practice. Okay. Hope? Did I hear hope?
I think you heard hope.
I heard hope. Just loud enough.
Quality.
Quality?
Yes,
What did
quality.
you say?
Quality.
Oh,
Thriving.
Thriving. Right big.
Got one here.
Communication.
Communication. Okay.
Self-determination.
Self-determination. Say that one again. Local resources.
Got another one here.
Culture.
Culture. Any others? Okay.
We have one over here.
Thanks for giving me the look. I would say I have two of them. One is patient-centered, and then also choosing your own path at your own pace. I don't know if that.
maybe autonomy.
I heard
Individualized.
another voice
I
out
got
there.
you.
Individualized, I think I heard. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for speaking up. And so I see access, best practices, hope, quality, thriving, communication, self-determination, local resources, culture, patient-centered, and individualized. So we know that health and the possibility of it is not well distributed at a population level, right? We've been talking about that for a fair amount of time today. And that's where we see disparity be a factor. But when we talk about health equity, you saw the slide earlier. And when you ask tribal people about what health and health equity is, you tend to move out of that space of things like physicians in our communities or medications available to us, and you start to hear things that are a lot more intangible, as we looked at this earlier. Things like dignity, kindness, joy, care for others, generosity, and interconnectedness, not only with human beings, but with the water, with the land, with place. So if we're going to drive health, and our definition of health equity involves those kinds of things, and not just, do you have access to health care? Do you have good understanding of the health resources that are available to you? Are there medicines available? Are there surgery and interventions available to you? It kind of gets to some of those other intangible things about how we define ourselves as Native people, and that tell us how to be healthy and whole in our world. So when you look at those two models, I talked a bit about the difference in the model earlier, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more now. At the center of that model, I spoke about the fact that you see individuals in family and community. Now, you are folks that work with individuals with diabetes or maybe at risk for diabetes. And if you have folks that are receiving food supplements, how many of them go home and eat those all by themselves? If they're getting SNAP, if they're getting WIC, if they're getting any of those kinds of things, what happens with that food when they go home? It gets shared with their whole family, right? Because we need to be in family, in community, and be collective. And so American healthcare doesn't really look at people in that collective way. They tend to want to very much individualize us, right? Individualize how your interaction is with them. They're aware that we have family that's relevant. Everybody has to go home to a place that they maybe interact with other people. But I think without understanding the depth of this connection for us, we're going to be missing some vital information about what might motivate individuals. I shared in a different setting years ago, we did some work with the White Mountain Apache tribe. I used to be the nurse exec and the assistant nurse exec at the hospital there years ago. And we had some learning that was really another one of those moments that things really shifted in my understanding of health and healthcare. And as an Indigenous person, I'm growing up in this, but still these worlds were fairly separated. And as I've grown in life, they've come closer together. But we were trying to get folks in the community to return their colorectal cancer screening cards. Probably a struggle many of you have already had if you've worked in healthcare for any time. And this was before the IFOBT. This was back when they just had the cards. And so we went to the community health aides, community health representatives there, and we were talking to them about this effort and working to collaborate. And when we asked them, what is it that we need to communicate to get folks to actually be willing to do this and get this in so we can screen for this terrible, terrible risk of, this terrible cancer? And would you know, they didn't say you need to tell them that they might have polyps and that you need to get those polyps out early so they don't become cancerous. That wasn't what they said. They said, you need to tell them it's important. It's important enough for me to come to your home, number one, to talk to you about this, but it's important that you're there for your children and for your grandchildren. So completely different kind of conversation than most of us would probably have in a healthcare setting, right? We're going to talk to you about your risks. We're going to talk to you about what happens if we don't treat things and what those outcomes will be, but we're not tying it to that intrinsic motivation that's connected to home, to family, to community. Additionally, in the slide, you can see that all of those domains are interconnected. They're difficult for Native people to ever separate out. If you actually are in a tribal community for any kind of a meeting or setting, and it might be about healthcare, it might be about something else, by the end of that conversation, you have usually run the gamut of almost all of these social drivers of health. I can't tell you how many Indian Health Service meetings I've been in. We've been talking about healthcare, and then it'll immediately go to, well, we don't have adequate transportation. People can't get to their healthcare visits, and that affects whether or not they have a job, and then whether or not they have access to food, and whether they can go out and hunt and gather or grow nutritious foods. So for tribal leaders, these are never separated. I don't know if any of you have been in that setting where you have had the conversation start where you thought you were talking about healthcare and you ended up way over here about early childhood education or transportation. And it's because they're all interconnected for us. We can't separate them out in the way that Western science often wants us to divide and silo them. They're also all embedded in that background of spirituality and culture. As you see with us today, it guides a lot of how we understand how to show up in the world. But I'll tell you, I learned as an adult, it guided even more than I realized. The way that I interact with my speech. The way in nursing school, when I sat in classes and I listened with my ear instead of with my eyes, I had an instructor come to me after the end of the course and say, be really surprised actually that I did well, because in the beginning she thought that I wasn't paying attention. But that's because I was giving my ear, and you don't speak unless you're given the permission to do so in a place of where you might have an elder or somebody who is in that honored position of teaching. So understanding that all of it colors those things. The patterns of my speech, it wasn't until I started to learn my Haida language as an adult, I realized the way I speak things in English is because of the sentence structure in the Haida language. Because I learned language from, my grandmother was a native speaker and also spoke English, and my dad was the first generation that didn't speak fluent Haida. But yet, a whole nother generation down to me, the way that I say things is because of how we would express something in Hadkil, in our Haida language. So all of those things are always at work in the background. And then lastly, the pieces about intergenerational trauma and historical policies, notice those are outside the circle. They may be things that have affected our reality, but they're not things that have to continue to drive our health. I think we can change those things and begin to shift the realities that lead to health. I just keep this one in there because it shows a little bit more descriptor for each of those domains. So with that background, again, we're going to switch gears here and start talking about what health looks like through the lens of Western and Indigenous knowledge systems. And this is where you're going to need those pieces of paper and pencils on your desk.
We're going to have fun. Okay. Does everybody have a table with colored pencils and paper? Yes, yes, yes. If you don't, come up and make a friend. There's open tables. Come.
Everybody is going to need 2 sheets of white paper to begin. So go ahead and
So yeah, you should have 2. If you don't, let us know. We'll get you more. So what you're going to do, on the first piece of paper in the top corner, put a T. Put an I. Put an I. I have to change language. IK, I guess. Okay. And so draw. You're going to have a few minutes. No pressure. Nobody's grading you or checking on your stuff. Draw what you envision Indigenous knowledge to be. What is it to you? And it hasn't escaped me that this is difficult, but draw what do you envision that to look like, and then when you're done, just write 1 sentence about how you felt drawing that image, or describe your image. So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Draw an image. So in the top corner, write IK. And then on that page, you can use any color. You got all those colored pencils. Draw what you envision in your mind's eye. What does Indigenous knowledge look like? What would you draw to describe that? And then write 1 sentence, either describing it or how you felt drawing that image. Okay, in the interest of time, how are you doing? Need a little bit more time? Doing good? I love that, like, the looks of horror on some people's faces. There's intention, and I'm going to explain that to you in a minute, too. So on your next page, go ahead. Okay, if you didn't notice, I have troublemaker on my badge for a reason. On your next piece of paper, in the top corner, write WS for Western medicine or Western science, and draw what you envision Western medicine to be. What does it look like to you? Oh, okay. How we doing? Good? Still drawing? Okay. So who found this hard? Was it hard to draw Indigenous knowledge? Have you ever had to draw that before? What about drawing Western medicine? So that's a part of communication that I like to talk about multimodal communication. There's different ways of communicating. In the US, when we look at reading and writing statistics for disabilities, two populations are overrepresented in that: Indigenous people and African Americans. And when we look back at the traditional forms of communicating, it's through art, oral tradition, drawing, song, dance. So we have to tap into those different ways of communicating, especially if we want to get information from your patients, okay? And so asking people to draw something sometimes, to articulate and show you how they're feeling, is one mode of communication, okay? The other part is I asked you to do something without giving you a lot of instruction for a reason. When someone comes in and you ask them a question and they don't know the context, I saw the looks on your faces. Some of you are like, oh my God. How do you respond to that? Okay, so think about the information you're providing and you're asking, and ask it 2 or 3 different ways, okay? So there was some intention in not giving you a lot of instruction. It was to let you think about, why was this hard? And so when someone comes in, how is it hard for them to answer you, okay? And then think about different ways of communicating, tying cultural values in, through story, through drawing. There's different ways of doing this, and they're all valid. So we're going to do you have one more piece of paper at your table?
Actually,
Everybody?
can we have them debrief first? So before they draw the last one, actually we want to invite you to tell us a little bit about your drawings. So if we can ask some brave souls to stand up and describe what you drew. How did you depict Indigenous knowledge on your paper? What does Indigenous knowledge look like, and what does it mean to you?
Where are my
Someone
brave
in the back.
souls? All right, we have a brave soul.
Oh, in the back too.
I'm going further back to the other brave soul I saw. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
So Indigenous knowledge brought me to nature, and so drawing the mountains, the trees, the sun, the river, and the grass, and the corn.
How, thank you.
How, all right, back here.
Yep.
I have a drum and a Eskimo dancing drum and stick, and it said, "Stories passed down generations by song and dance."
How,
Thank you.
Thank you.
anyone else want to share?
Oh,
A few others.
on my way.
Okay.
I drew a wild tea that is grown on our reservation, and we use that for our medicine.
Oh, how,
Wild tea for medicine?
Yes.
Heard. Okay. Others?
Go ahead, John. You pass the mic. You're next.
I drew a tree because the knowledge comes from the earth and the growth of the tree and the sun.
oh, how,
Lots of images of nature.
I drew some nature in there too, tree, river, but I put it in a circle. Feels very circular to me.
yeah. Awesome. There's one behind you in the back.
Oh, one behind me.
I drew a log, and then going from that log, the wood structure, to the kayak that is built with that knowledge.
Beautiful.
How, you want to go to the next one?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, very different ways of understanding the world and having knowledge, right? And much more connected to nature, to outdoors, to plants. I don't think we heard about any animals today, but sometimes those show up in these drawings. But they're often depicted in ways that you have done today. They're circular and they're connected to nature. Now, how about Western science or Western knowledge? Tell me what you drew on some of those pages.
Over
Oh,
here.
I know. I saw someone's pillbox or pill bottle. Yes.
A pill bottle.
A pill bottle.
It's a good representation of a pill bottle.
I actually saw the pills in the bottle being constructed. It's a nice
Okay.
pill bottle.
I drew little squares and people lying in them, very isolated from one another.
And you drew a circle before, so the opposite of circular.
Yeah.
I drew a building surrounded by a fence because it's often an exclusive club that not a lot of people can get into unless you have the money, resources, and ability to understand it or get a degree.
Interesting.
Out of touch.
Not easily accessible.
A hospital.
Hospital. I saw yours, Bill. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So now you're going to work in groups on your last image. You can do that. Push the button. Thank you. So you're going to work together, and you're going to do one image. So you're going to have different cultural backgrounds, different worldviews, different disciplines. You're going to use that to collectively to draw Western medicine and Indigenous medicine together in harmony with access, best practices, hope, thriving, quality, communication, self-determination, local resources, culture, I can't read my handwriting, individualized, and patient-centered. Think of that as you're drawing those together. So you're going to work in a group. You can do it as one table or you can split your table, but we'll give you a couple minutes to do that together. So how are these systems together in harmony? You don't have to be artistic. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't have a rubric here to score it today, so it's
I
good.
was not making fun of the stick people. That is how I draw. I was serious.
Yeah, that works good.
Huh?
Yeah. truck through. We'll get it. Okay. How much time we got? We can go through. Hmm? Oh, we're gonna. Yeah, this will go quick. Is that okay? Yeah, that's nice. It's all right.
It's helpful for this slide. I didn't even realize that was there the first the beginning because it was out of my line of view.
Oh yeah.
That's why I kept looking. I'm like, I can't see my slides.
Hmm? We'll just have two. Just two. Or just two or three. Two. Two would be good. But it's interesting how it aligned with that. You got it. Excuse me? Yeah, I know. Yeah. All right. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Well. We're going to keep moving. All right. All right, how you doing? Was this easier or harder? Harder?
More fun? Did I hear that?
Yeah. Is there a mic down there? Okay. Is there one or two tables that would like to talk about what you did and how this was harder or easier, or what did you come up with? Oh, I'm sorry, I asked the wrong question. Who is going to? I said who wants to. Who's going to share what they're doing, what they did?
And even if you didn't get to finish,
Yeah.
tell us what you conceived. What was the conceptual idea that you were moving towards to show these two knowledge systems in harmony?
Mm-hmm.
We're not above calling people out.
One table? All right. Wait, did you have your hand up or were you stretching? Okay. She was like,
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was like kind of doing both, but so our team, we talked about listening to the community, bringing through whatever transportation, we have a snowmobile, but whatever transportation to the community, bringing health to them, and then sharing, learning amongst the community from outside healthcare, but also the knowledge within the community. And food is medicine, traditional foods as medicine. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
At least one more.
Yay.
Okay.
Our team worked really hard on this. So we had nature as more of a indigenous knowledge, and then our medical system in the city here as our Western knowledge. And then we wanted to combine them by maybe our medical system giving prescriptions for walking, being out in nature, produce prescriptions, others, and definitely the medical decision, including people's values, their family, and the family wishes and their wishes in medical decisions and treatment, asking what they want for their medical plan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any addition? Nope.
Going.
How?
Okay. Do I have to push this button to advance?
Yes.
Okay. So I've done this. I have 200 images. I've worked with high school kids, undergraduate students, graduate students, education professionals, medical professionals, and the one constant, I'm like, you took my screen. The one constant is there's always something very personal. It's nature. There's lots of color, there's curves and turns, grounded through the trees, culturally relevant imagery.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you needed somewhere to put your computer.
And so it's very consistent across age, discipline, everybody. So, and what I heard is very similar things. You use forests, trees, imagery like that. And what we always see, again, with these different groups, is a difference in how Western sciences or knowledges are described. The colors aren't mixed, they're siloed. It's very angular. It's very interesting. And the one group I had that didn't draw a difference between these two systems was high school students, because they hadn't experienced differences in them yet. And I think that gives us the challenge to not put them in the position of thinking they can't be part of science, they can't be part of medicine, that they can coexist together in harmony, and that we can merge these together into a same way of thinking, okay? So I thought it was very interesting to see how no matter what group, what discipline, age, everybody had very similar things. So we're gonna, you got your mic? Okay. So talking about perceptions of Indigenous and Western medicine, Indigenous medicine, healthcare practitioners. So if we define HIDA health, and that's the only thing I can talk about is HIDA health and wellness, it's living right in relationship with self, clan, community, and ancestors. Our Indigenous knowledges in medicines are about 20,000 plus years old. Formal Western medicine is about 2,500, and biomedical is 200 years old. But we always go to the one knowledge system, and we devalue and dismiss the other. For practitioners, it's based on interconnectedness of body, mind, spirit, community, and environment. It's about balance. Health is about balance. And the approach looks for root causes in spiritual, emotional, and community imbalances. So bringing things back to balance, cultural centering, what our intentions are. And the practices used for healing is through ceremony, plant medicines, songs, prayer, things to restore harmony. And I think the last speaker talked about or mental health. If you feel bad and you're depressed, anxiety, it's going to be a little bit harder to heal, right? It's going to impact your health, and it's going to manifest, right? So mental health improves resilience, pain management, and self-care motivation. And this morning, Capt. Towne talked about toxic stress, the impacts it has on our bodies. And so when your patients come in, what are they experiencing? And how do we realign them to our cultural values? So using cultural values in the room to talk to patients. Sometimes we can address them saying, Is there any of these cultural values that you're feeling right now are out of balance? There's a way of engaging with your patient. For public attitudes towards traditional medicine, there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of trauma, intergenerational trauma in healthcare. Who decides what health and wellness are? Do our people? Historically, colonial systems imposed Western definitions of health. So when someone comes in talking about their cultural practices for healing and health, it's dismissed. And that impacts people. That is part of who we are. Our ways of knowing and our ways of using our traditional medicines and knowledges is who we are. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Indigenous health and wellness practices were outlawed. In 1883, the Code of Indian Offenses aimed to stop paganism and hedonism. That's what our cultural healing practices were considered. So there's a history. The goal was to eliminate spirituality, governance systems, and culture. And if you practiced your culture, your cultural healing practices, you were put in prison and subject to hard labor. In 1921 to 1934, there was a continuation of outlawing practices, one of them being the potlatch, which is our Haida law. We practice our law through potlatch. In 1978, American Indian Religious Freedom Act. So when I was born, we could not publicly practice our ceremony. You'd be breaking a law. And that woman who raised me grew up in that. And now it's my responsibility to learn and regain that culture and reclaim it and teach the next generation. But that's part of who we are and part of how we heal and how we engage with the world. What's beeping? Okay. And then 1990, there was the reclamation continues today. So we see a lot of that now. It's exciting. These 30 and 20-year-olds are in a time when they're reclaiming language, they're reclaiming practices and culture, and they can do it safely. And it's so different than the way we grew up, being ashamed of our culture, being ashamed to speak Hodkill. But now it's alive and well, and it's part of who we are. So when people come into your room, ask them, what medicines are they using? If they're using Devil's Club tea, that impacts their blood sugar. It impacts their blood pressure. And you need to know what they're taking so that you can prescribe according to what they're already taking into their bodies. Hmm? Oh, are you going to do the Western medicine?
And as you look at the slides and you look at the drawings that you did, that description of Western medicine, the angularness, the siloing, the rigidness, that's kind of some of the realities of that, right? Think about what randomized controlled trials look like. Let's eliminate all the variables that might actually factor in so we understand how a particular medication or something works. But the reality is, out in the real world, people live real lives that are very rarely ever isolated in conditions like a randomized controlled trial. When we look at Western medicine, it's often thought about as scientific and neutral as we come in, right? We think about it as being objective and communicate it that way, but the reality is there are a lot of cultural and social assumptions that still play into how Western medicine is formed and described. When I first learned about how much of the sociological evidence base that we have is based on college students, that was a mind blower for me, because I'm thinking, wow, that's a very select group of individuals, people who had the means to go to school, participated, were willing to put themselves into a lab, and that is the basis of much of our sociologic evidence base in the country. That one was a big mind blower for me, because it's those things that I learned as a nurse way back when that I thought I understood, and it made me rethink some things that I understood. There's a gap between how the biomedical world categorizes illness and health. We've talked about that a fair amount today. you see that idea of standardization in evidence-based practice out there. Evidence is important, don't get me wrong. I think we must rely on evidence-based practice. The challenge is that evidence doesn't only come through randomized controlled trials and structured sciences. Evidence can come in hundreds of years of practices that tell you that if you engage in certain behaviors or certain cultural practices, that you have different outcomes, like mental well-being and centering and health. The idea of the imposition on societies, that's often it comes in, and if we're not actually asking ourselves these questions, how does Western medicine and how does the indigenous knowledge of this community merge together and blend, then we're bringing in an exterior science and expecting that that community absorbs that, understands it, and aligns with it. And I think what the reality is, the things that tell us who we are and how we are to be still happen, they just don't happen in the exam room, right? Which means that we then enter into a very limited relationship with the patients that come in our room to actually move them to a place of health equity, to that place where we all have the same chance to experience health as everybody else in this nation. And accessibility, one of the pictures that was drawn kind of demonstrated that far better than I can say it. And then psychosocial factors also are predictive of the use and effectiveness of alternative medicines and the actual outcomes of the treatments. And you have the clicker? Mm-hmm. Okay. So very different kinds of ways of thinking about medicine and health.
So on the left is a new way of looking at those cultural values we showed you in the beginning. Humor, respect for self, respect for elders, holding each other up, connected to land, air, and water. And we recognize our people come from our communities with these cultural values. But we also move in another space too, right? As practitioners and as patients, we step into this Western expectation. We're going to comply. We're going to do what you tell us to do for our own health care. But that doesn't always happen. And so what happens when a patient doesn't agree with you? What are the communication expectations? There's different ways of communicating. And the prioritizing and centering Western knowledges is another difficult way of having patients come in. So we're moving along this spectrum back and forth all the time. And so wherever your patient is, you don't know. You don't know if they're nested over here or if they're going to comply over here. So you have to figure out how to work with that patient to make sure they stay healthy and that you get the information you need from them. So if we're going from cultural values to these expectations, there's a universal truth, right? That it's culture-free. Western medicine, Western science is culture-free, and there's an expectation that everything we know is true, which means our cultural ways are not true. That's the interpretation. Define health according to Eurocentric cultural norms. Okay, we can't keep doing that. We have a very diverse country. We have a very diverse state. Anything less than perfect compliance has consequences. What happens when your patient doesn't comply? You don't know why. I had a doctor or a nurse completely dump all my medicine out because I asked, why did I need this? Why do I need that? And she just shot it in the sink and walked out of the room. We can't keep doing that. If they're not complying, maybe there's more information that they need. And there's a way of describing that differently. Don't just hand literature. Have a discussion and a conversation. Get rid of the stopwatch in the room and have a conversation. And then we're going back over to our cultural practices. The spiritual part of nature is absolute. And when I talk about spirituality, I am not talking about religion. Those are two different things, okay? Spiritual through ceremony and connection. An example of that, for me, part of my spirituality is walking in the forest and just being on the land. And thinking about who was on that land before me. When our people harvest, they leave a strand of hair. And what are you always dropping? DNA, carbon. You're always shedding skin. And you're in the forest. Our people were in the forest ahead of us, and they're in those trees now. They're in that forest. And there's a spiritual connection for us there. Okay, it's not just a tree, it's not just a commodity. There's a connection. That's our relative that we're visiting. And it impacts our health and our well-being and our way of viewing the world. Cultural values tell us to be thankful and express that through ceremony. Responsibility to live a good life, raise good people, and good leaders. But what's living a good life? Who defines that? That's a personal decision, right? I'm going to tell you what living a good life is, and you hope they listen to you. But maybe have a conversation again. Have a different way of speaking with people so that you get the most information so that you can make informed recommendations for your patients. Don't take yourself too seriously. Intellectual humility is very important. Okay? Just because we don't understand what someone's telling us doesn't mean they're wrong. And it's our job to take a step back and learn about what they're telling us. That's our responsibility when we work with people from different cultures and communities. And we take on that responsibility by accepting that position to work with people with different backgrounds. Okay? Again, here's the cultural values. This is Heidelberg Totem Park. And so I'm going to talk to you briefly about some cultural indigenous science concepts that I teach in my classes. And I tried to lay them out according to these cultural values. So respect, community, animacy, humility, reciprocity, cultural responsibility, language, relationality, beinghood, and guardianship. And so I could do a whole hour talking about that, but I'm not gonna. So let's briefly go through what those are. Animacy is the state of being alive and animate. And so what does that mean? Anyone ever see a mushroom growth cycle image in biology class? Anyone ever see that? No? Yes? Okay. So when you look at that image, you start seeing how the fruiting body is dropping spores. It goes through the growth process and elongation in the soil, and then it pops up, and you have a fruiting body again. And where that mycelium comes up through the soil, there's nothing there to describe what that is. But in Ojibwe, there's a word, papawi, meaning the energy, the life force to move through the soil. That's fascinating. There's no English word to describe that, so there's nothing on that. Go look up a mushroom growth cycle. Now you're going to be like, oh my God. But it's really amazing to start looking at our languages and seeing how we have these ways of viewing the world. It's animate. It's just sitting there when we're looking at it, but it's moving. We just don't see it, okay? Beinghood and personhood, the state, quality, or condition of being or existing. So what's been happening lately in the last few years, I don't know if you, at the beginning of this year, in New Zealand, the Maori people gave beinghood to a sacred mountain that was going to be mined. Last year, in 2024, whales were given beinghood. All these Pacific nations came together and gave whales beinghood. In 2021, Ponca Nation gave beinghood to a river that runs through their tribal lands. What does that mean? What that means is now there's legal recourse when someone upstream contaminates that river through industry discharge, pollution, farming practices. When that water gets contaminated, there's a legal recourse now. It's a being. And so the tribe can act on behalf of that being and get that remediated. It's a very rapid growing policy or practice that's been happening. The Maori are way ahead of us on doing this, but it's how they are protecting their resources and their spaces. Humility, free from pride and arrogance. Boy, they did not teach us that in grad school. You be right no matter what. Don't say, I don't know. And I always tell my students, don't believe a word I tell you, because you're agreeing that what I'm saying is true. You're agreeing to listen and say, okay, yeah, look for yourself. There might be someone else with a different opinion. What I know is only what I've seen and learned. There's so much more out there I don't know. Look it up. Have that humility. Stewardship versus guardianship. And so what I'll say about that, has anyone ever heard the word stewardship? I should see every hand in here raised. I'm sure you have. So we hear our tribes talk about stewardship all the time. And we're in Alaska. Everybody wants our fisheries, our trees, our minerals, oil. And so when we have these conversations between our tribes and these industry or external stakeholders, there's always this word stewardship used back and forth, but they mean different things. When we say stewardship, we're talking about guardianship, our relationship with space, our responsibility to take care of that environment because it takes care of us. And when we harm that environment, it harms our people, right? We have unsafe foods to eat. Our foods disappear. It changes our health system. It changes our diet. So when I like to say guardianship versus stewardship, because when we say stewardship, we don't always define what we mean. And we mean something very different than having ownership of land. Okay? Relationality, how we're related to one another and to the natural world. Because we do have a relationship. Everything you do impacts someone else and something else around you. Reciprocity, practice of exchanging for mutual benefit. Respect, yasdang, core cultural value. Cultural responsibility, we are accountable to our clans, our nations, and our families. So we should always act in a way that when you call my mom, she's not going to be like, what did you do today? Because it comes back. Individualism versus community. Am I doing something on behalf of my community and they're helping and guiding me along the way, or am I doing this for myself? There's no right or wrong. It's just a different way of how we navigate the world. Place, a deep spiritual connection to. I just talked to you about how we have a spiritual relationship with the land and water and air that we're around, where our people came from. Language, a repository of knowledge accumulated through generations. It carries that deep knowledge of what happened in the past and how it impacts us today. We can look back at stories and hear about the water cycle. We can look at stories and hear about how food resources have changed. And we can link that to climate. We can link that to industry. We can link that to human health. We have a uranium mine on Prince of Wales, abandoned mine. That water circulates around the island, and we have cancers popping up now that we never had in our community before. But there's language that talks about those stories of what happened there. So when I talk about knowledges, I want to briefly define this from my own perspective, because everyone you talk to is going to have a different definition. And that's what makes it so hard to use indigenous traditional knowledges, because each nation has the right to define what it is, right? And no matter who you talk to, they're going to have a different definition. So when I talk about indigenous knowledges, I'm talking about a global body of knowledge, right? Indigenous people are global, okay? 20,000 plus years. Traditional knowledge, that is knowledge local and regional. So Heidelberg on Prince of Wales Island in Southeast Alaska, okay? Traditional is looking at cultural and traditional use products and practices. Cedar, spruce roots, minerals. Traditional ecological knowledge is looking at local and regional, but looking at food systems, the ecology in these food webs. Our indigenous knowledges is a mixture of qualitative, quantitative, and spiritual knowledge. Has the same rigor. It's designed the same rigor as Western science, but we dismiss it. And we don't engage with our patients about it when we talk about it. And there's fear, and I understand there's fear there, but we have, again, that responsibility to learn and to ask questions. We can ask questions respectfully and learn from our patients as well. The difference between religion and spirituality. Spirituality, there's no bounds on it. You define that for yourself, and your nation helps you. You're influenced by that through your nation. Religion, there's rules, okay? Whatever religion, there's rules and boundaries, right? Very different ways of thinking of things. Indigenous knowledge varies. There's 574-ish federally recognized tribes, 66 state recognized. Everyone has a different knowledge system because they're in different environments, but there's always a commonality through that. And that makes it so hard for people to understand. I like this image on the bottom. I don't know if I have another image of it. Look at that cloud. That's pan-indigeneity. An Indian is an Indian is an Indian. I have been asked to perform Dene, Navajo ceremonies, Ojibwe ceremonies because I'm Alaska Native. That's not my place to do that, right? So let's say the cloud is all indigenous people. Each raindrop is a separate nation. Yeah, we have a commonality, but we're individual. Each raindrop has a different water chemistry, a different size, a different weight. It's going to land in a different place. And it's going to come together in a watershed. And we have that shared knowledge again. Am I running out of time? Okay, I'm going to talk really fast. So when we look at indigenous knowledges, they're categorized in different buckets, let's say. Hunting, agriculture, traditional medicines, ethnoastronomy, climate, and others. So there's different forms of that knowledge. There's always reciprocity and respect, reverence, relationship to each other and to the environment, and our responsibility to leave the spaces we occupy healthy for 7 generations. See, I'm trucking through here. We're going to keep going. The holistic perspective, this is the image Captain Towne showed you earlier, views the whole person, the holistic part of who we are. And we have very different parts of who we are and our identities. There's short-term manifestation, substance abuse, domestic violence, health declines, right? And then there's long-term manifestations, where we're not treating a person, the whole person. This is your slide. Oh, she's showing me a plate with time on it. You want me to skip it?
Yeah, that's okay. This is just in here. In here again to remind us. So if we're connecting that indigenous world and the Western world, knowledge is that this is going to be what it takes to get to those issues that I talked about this morning that are down there deep and changing the trajectory of health. And in order to do that, we're going to have to address the social drivers of health in our communities to make that happen. And we have to get back to those roots, back to that bedrock of people, family, and community in order to heal. But I want to bring us back together a little bit, and I don't know if you want to address that slide, but
Just that one. Go ahead. That's like 4 or 5 slides ahead.
so she's saying she's been covering some of this, but hasn't actually moved the slides.
All right. I think maybe this is the last one for me. So thinking of bridging these knowledge systems together, if you look at the middle, there's that traditional knowledge. And that cedar plate, that weave is called cedar plate. And so I like to think of indigenous knowledges as a sphere. And within that, all these different knowledges are at play. Social, spiritual, math, chemistry. When you ask someone where they go fishing, they're going to tell you all of that. But they're going to say, oh, I'm just going fishing. There's so much in there. And so I like to think of our knowledges are guided by our spirituality, language, cultural responsibility, protocols, and practices. And when we move out of community into another space, whether it be medical care, education, we step into a different knowledge system that's siloed. And I think some of you got to that with your drawings. And if you're out in this outer part, that's how you learned, and then you're coming into this indigenous way of working with patients that have this indigenous knowledge. We think differently about these different things. And so we have to learn to bridge those knowledge systems together, increasing our critical thinking skill, but they can go back and forth. So we need Western science. We need to be able to look at the problem, right? We need to be able to get down and do these different tests to see what is it, A1C? Mm-hmm. Okay, you need to know what A1C is. But you also need to know what are they eating. And that goes to tie back into their indigenous knowledges and ways of guiding them to change their diet. We talk about biology. I'll just do an example of how these systems are connected. We always hear about pure science in academia, but there's no such thing. Is there? You talk about microbiology, I'm a microbiologist. What do I need to do to grow bacteria? I need to know what's going to feed them, so I need to know chemistry. I need to know what they're going to attach to, so I need to know environmental science as well as material science. I need to know if they're going to make an enzyme that can be used for industry, so there's business and economics all tied into that. And so everything we know from one discipline impacts how we interpret the knowledge that we get. And using these together, we get a broader view of what that patient needs and how can we help treat them using culture and their ways of healing and their definition of health and wellness. And that's how we're going to be effective working with people, is being able to see the whole picture, both sides. Because while we might only be talking about this Western knowledge, our patient is not, right? So we have to be able to address that as well.
All right. So as we begin to bridge these knowledge systems, you've heard us talk a lot about values, about Indigenous values, and Western science. And they're very different concepts from an academic standpoint. But from an individual living in this world, they're not so different. And if you go back to that definition of what health equity was that we shared, you saw kindness, you saw joy, you saw care for others. Those are values. And so getting to a point that we can begin to bridge these knowledge systems means we're going to need to weave those in. We're going to need to start pulling in those values for how those individuals that we're caring for understand the world, their health, their family, their community, to actually, I think, make inroads into health in our communities and on our people. And so I'm going to move along here so we can get to this last exercise. But as you do this, this is something that's done in co-design. This is not something that somebody outside a community can come and do and bring in on their own. You heard Dr. Todd reference to it. We can't speak to other tribes' cultural practices. We can't speak to their ways of knowing and being. So as healthcare practitioners weaving this in, how do you navigate that? You have to do it in partnership. You have to do it guided by those who can give you the permissions to use and guide that. Their elders, their traditional healers, their culture bearers. You have a model with South Central Foundation that does that a lot differently than the rest of the world. If you look at the Dene people, they have the Navajo wellness model that is guiding how they give care in their healthcare system in their community. They've begun to interweave those together. But it has to be reflective of the community. I heard local knowledge on one of the drawings of Indigenous knowledge. You drew that, right? It's local. Something I didn't say about social drivers of health earlier, they're contextual. They depend on what's going on in the community around you, so that local knowledge is critical as well, and it should be engaged in ethically and respectfully. I have in the slide set the engagement model that we have been using in the Reshaping the Drivers of Care SDOH collaborative, and you see in this collaborative this expectation of circular communication and feedback to community and working hand in hand to implement changes that they help to co-design in the community, so that when you design an intervention, you know that it actually addresses both sides. It addresses the Western science side and the Indigenous science or Indigenous knowledge side. But I want to get actually to this last exercise, if we can.
We had 425 slides for you. No kidding. We're not even halfway through.
This connection of traditional values and our way of life to a way of being healthy. On your table, there are sets of different values. This came from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, but you see a commonality amongst all of our, many of our tribal groups, that when we describe who we are, we can't describe ourselves without describing intention, behavior, and values. I'm going to ask you to take that other sheet of paper that's on your table that looks like an ovoid kind of shape, and it's got 4 questions on it. And we're going to ask you to spend these last few minutes there it is, in this exercise. So in your groups for the next few minutes, can you work through number one, listing 3 to 5 values that you know are important to your tribe and to your community? And then how do those values link to healthcare? Think a little deeper about those values and how can you connect them to health and wellness and healthcare. And we may not get to 3 and 4, but I'm going to ask you to do 1 and 2 if you could.
Overly optimistic. I think that'd be cool. I wonder if they could leave their pictures. Ask them if they can. They want to, if they can. We need to get them. I wonder if you could ask them. Show this to you. Are you speaking? It'd be cool if they could show you that on the last day. Okay. Tomorrow night? Oh, okay. All right, it'd be cool to see what they got. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Towne? Towne.
The White River before?
Yes.
For how long?
I was there a couple of times. I was there from, let's see, I have to think about this time the kids were born. I was there from, the last time was 2013 to 2014, and the first time was, she's 21 now. 2000. No, we didn't have all that. So, yeah, this was in 2005. So that's been 2005. Do you remember? She's a part in. Is that her guy? Yeah. Thank you. All right, I see lots of blank paper. And that's okay. That is, I'm not throwing shade at all, because this is hard work. And I'm challenging you here again today to be thinking about this, because I think if we're going to actually get to a place of health and wellness for our people, we have to learn how to merge these worlds. We have to be able to start to intertwine them and bring that into the walls of the healthcare facility, because that's not where health happens, but it's where the conversations about it do, right? And then we go out into the community as Native people and we live our lives the way we know how to live them, and those things aren't quite hitting each other right now. They're not on the same plane. And so my challenge to you today, take that paper, pull it out from the slides, go home, think about this. How can you start to do this from the side of the healthcare side? From the slides you saw earlier, I think a lot of our tribes already know these things, they get them, but I'm going to challenge the folks that are Indigenous in the room. Your job is to be a translator. These are things I've struggled my whole career to be able to articulate, because it's not easy. And until we can come farther and begin to share that knowledge and articulate it in a way that folks coming from a very different paradigm understand science, I think we're not going to be able to move towards health in the way that we all want to see health to happen. And with that, I'm actually going to close this out because I see Judy over here.
All right.
Thank you for your participation. Thank you for those who were brave. Thank you to those who drew.
Yeah.
We appreciate you.
Yeah. So on your tables, there's tea, table salt with spruce tip, cedar oil candies. I brought gifts for everyone just to say how adangat kolag and thank you for spending your time with us and to tell you how honored I am that you came and spent time with us in ceremony with one another. There's our medicines are up here if you want to come look at them. So I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. Everybody stand up. And we're going to make friends. Put your hand, touch the person next to you. So that we have a big line. Everyone's going to be connected in here. Across table. Everybody. Wait. We're going to make a chain. I guess I better. I have to practice what I preach, I guess. So we said earlier, and Captain Towne started with Aji Wadlawan Ududal Kwagan. Everything is connected. And right now, we are all connected. The person in the back of the room, I'm connected to you through this chain. We're passing our energy to each other, our intentions to each other. We're all connected, and what we do impacts those around us, and it impacts you. So remember that as you move forward in the great work